name Amenemhet means Amen is the head. Besides Pharaoh Amenemhet and biblical Abraham living in the same place at the same time, is there any other evidence connecting biblical Abraham to Pharaoh Amenemhet I? According to Egyptian history, Pharaoh Amenemhet I was not of royal blood, and his family origin is unknown. Egyptology experts believe he seized the throne of Egypt after murdering Pharaoh Mentuhotep. In 1818, Antonio Lobolo made a revolutionary discovery that identified the biblical Abraham as an Egyptian pharaoh. During Lobolo's excavations in the Egyptian Valley of the Kings, he exhumed 11 Egyptian mummies along with rolls of papyri inscribed with hieroglyphic writings and drawings. One of those drawings was interpreted by Mormon Joseph Smith and his Egyptologists as Abraham sitting on the pharaoh's throne. Abraham's name was also deciphered on a roll of papyrus. Joseph Smith published his controversial findings in the Book of Abraham in 1842 and was murdered 2 years later. Today, the only Egyptian pyramid tomb forbidden to the public is the tomb of Pharaoh Amenemhet I, who many researchers now believe is the biblical Abraham. Why have Egyptologists never found the remains of Pharaoh Amenemhet I or a biblical Abraham? The best explanation is that their common remains are concealed inside the famous Ark of the Covenant. The Hollywood movie Raiders of the Lost Ark was about the search for the lost Ark of the Covenant. According to the Bible story, the tablets of the Ten Commandments given to Moses by God were stored inside the ark. Egyptian artifacts tell the true story about what's really inside the Ark of the Covenant. The Ark of the Covenant is, in fact, an Egyptian canopic chest, where the dried organs of royal kings and pharaohs were stored, not the Ten Commandments. Why did the Hebrews call their royal canopic chest the Ark of the Covenant? Because the name signifies the covenants or promises that God made with Abraham. Would the Hebrews carry the Ark of the Covenant into battle to kill and steal if it really contained commandments like, "Thou shalt not kill or steal"? The best explanation is that the Ark contained the remains of their ancestral leader who led them into battle. Biblical Hebrew rulers like King Solomon broke all of the commandments just like today's rulers who make and break laws and commandments to exploit the obedient masses. The evidence shows that the ancestral patriarch of the Hebrew Jews is Amenemhet I, and that his biblical name is Abraham. Since Pharaoh Amenemhet worshipped the god Amen, are Amen and the biblical God the same God? Michelangelo's Vatican painting of God depicts God as an angry, bearded white man. God's words, actions, and deeds in the Bible's Old Testament show God's extreme favoritism for the Hebrews generally and for Hebrew males in particular. By today's standards, that behavior is considered both racist and sexist. God admits to being a jealous God who approves of ritual human and animal sacrifice as proof that he is obeyed and worshipped above all other gods. He terrorizes, punishes, and kills the enemies of the Hebrews. He uses his godly power to kill Egyptian children and spread plagues, famines, pestilence, and darkness. He magically turns staffs into deadly venomous snakes and turns the Nile River into blood. Like the biblical god, the god Amun-Ra also turns the Nile River into blood in the Egyptian myth of Hathor. The Bible God's opinion of humanity is that all human beings are sinful children who are all born into sin. Since his words and deeds describe an angry, violent, and jealous God, are the biblical God and the ancient Egyptian god Amun, whose name is repeated over and over in the Bible, one and the same God? What is an Egyptian pyramid and the eye of the Egyptian god Horus doing on the American $1 bill? Why have Washington, London, and the Vatican erected towering obelisk monuments honoring the pagan Egyptian god Amun-Ra? In the next Bible episode, Abraham's son Isaac, who Abraham almost stabbed to death, grows up to father twin boys named Jacob and Esau. A murderous rivalry develops between the twins, and Jacob flees to a place known today as Bethel in Israel. He lays his head down to rest on a large, smooth stone and dreams of a stairway reaching to heaven like a ladder. The stairway in Jacob's dream describes the step pyramids built by Egyptian pharaohs like ladders reaching to heaven. The symbolic stone where the Hebrew Jacob laid his head thousands of years ago in Bethel is alternately called the Stone of Jacob, the Stone of Destiny, and the Stone of Scone. Today, the symbolic stone can be found underneath the British throne chair on top of the symbolic step pyramid where the Queen and other British monarchs have been crowned.
The battered oak coronation throne, on which every English monarch has been crowned, is built over the Stone of Scone.
As the Bible story continues, God promises Jacob that a nation and a company of nations shall come from him, and kings will spring from him. Jacob marries two of his girl cousins and fathers 12 sons. As Jacob ages, Joseph becomes his favorite son, and Dan becomes his venomous son. Jacob eventually takes his sons and his Hebrew clan and migrates from Canaan into Egypt. This Hebrew migration into Egypt closely parallels Egyptian history when the Semitic Hyksos migrants overthrew the Egyptian pharaohs and seized the throne of Egypt. One of the Semitic Hyksos leaders who became king of Egypt was Yaqubeir. Since Yaqubeir is the Aramaean name for Jacob, Egyptology experts interpret this as factual evidence that the biblical Jacob and the Hyksos king Yaqubeir were one and the same. Historical records show that the Semitic Hyksos kings ruled Egypt for over 100 years. The Egyptian people rebelled against these Semitic kings and pushed them into northern Egypt. By 1500 BC, a peace agreement was reached between the Egyptians and the Semitic Hyksos, which allowed the Hyksos people to leave Egypt peaceably and move to Palestine and Jerusalem in the Egyptian-controlled land of Canaan. Their gradual and peaceful migration closely matches the Bible story of the Semitic Hebrew exodus from Egypt into Canaan in 1447 BC. According to the Bible story, when the Hebrews arrived in Canaan, they renamed it Israel and divided the land up into 12 tribal states, which they named after the sons of Jacob. Jacob's favorite son Joseph stayed behind in Egypt. Joseph hid his Hebrew identity by marrying an Egyptian wife and changing his name to the Egyptian name Zaphanath-Paneah, which means he who can reveal secrets. According to the Bible, Joseph ruled Egypt as the Pharaoh's top vizier and bought up all the private land in Egypt from the starving people. Then he taxed them out of 1/5 of their income. Was Joseph the chief vizier of Pharaoh Moses who negotiated the peace agreement allowing the Semitic Hebrew Hyksos people to settle in the Egyptian-controlled land of Canaan? The Hebrew connection to the Egyptian pharaohs is further revealed in the biblical story of Moses.
Many years ago, in a land called Egypt, there lived a very mean king. Egyptian kings were called pharaohs.
The story begins with the Egyptian pharaoh ordering the deaths of all Hebrew baby boys.
Oh no! They won't get my baby. I'll find some way to save him.
The Hebrew mother of baby Moses tries to save him by hiding him in the bulrushes on the Nile River.
What's that? A baby!
When baby Moses is found by the princess daughter of the Egyptian pharaoh, the princess decides to raise him as her own son. Moses now has two mothers, a royal Egyptian princess mother and a non-royal Hebrew mother who hides her identity as Moses' Hebrew mother, gets a job as a servant at the palace, and helps the princess raise Moses. Why did the Bible omit the historical names of the pharaoh's princess daughter and the pharaoh? Their historical identities can be found by comparing the dates and events of the Bible story with factual Egyptian history. All dates followed by the letters BC count backwards to 0, which is the beginning of today's Christian calendar. Bible researchers have calculated the birth of Moses at around 1520 BC. The ruling pharaoh of Egypt at that time was Thutmose I, and his princess daughter was Hatshepsut. Egyptian history verifies that Princess Hatshepsut married her brother named Pharaoh Thutmose II. But when Hatshepsut couldn't produce a male heir to the throne, her brother husband chose a non-royal mistress named Isis to produce a male heir and named their son Thutmose III. Hatshepsut raised the boy as her own son, even though Isis was his real birth mother. The Bible story of Moses closely matches the factual Egyptian story of Thutmose III. Even the names Moses and Thutmose are almost identical. In the Bible story, Moses gives up his big chance to be the richest, most powerful ruler in the ancient world to become a lowly, poverty-stricken Hebrew laborer. But wouldn't becoming ruler of Egypt and Canaan have been the most intelligent way to help his fellow Hebrews? The historical facts show that's exactly what Thutmose III did. Once he grew up to become Pharaoh of Egypt, Thutmose III organized military campaigns with his mighty armies and chariots and defeated the enemies of the Hebrew Hyksos who had settled in Canaan. After his famous Battle of Megiddo in Canaan in 1479 BC, Thutmose installed district governors in garrison cities throughout Canaan. Did Thutmose choose his district governors from the 12 Hebrew tribes named in the Bible? Is it just a coincidence that today's Temple of Isis, located on the Isle of Philae in Egypt, has the same name as Thutmose's mother? Some suggest that Thutmose III built the original Temple of Isis to honor his Hebrew mother, who was named after the goddess Isis, and that the temple was later restored by the Ptolemy kings. An inscription inside the temple identifies Isis as the mistress queen of Egypt. Today, Thutmose III is immortalized in stone in the corporate city-state of London, right next to his Egyptian obelisk honoring the pagan Egyptian god Amun. Why has UNESCO and others spent billions of dollars and years of labor moving the massive tonnage of the Isis temple and obelisks honoring the pagan god Amun? The answer lies within the continuing Bible story. After the Hebrews settled in the land of Canaan, they renamed it Israel. Their king, King David, reigned for 50 years. Egyptian history reveals that Pharaoh Susenes also ruled Canaan for nearly 50 years, at the same time as the biblical King David. Both battled the same enemy called the Sea People or Philistines. Both King David and Pharaoh Susenes had sons with almost identical names, Solomon and Simon. The name of biblical King David's son, Sol-Amon, means son for Saul, and O-M-O-N is an alternative spelling of Ammon. The name of Pharaoh Susenes' son, Si-Amon, means son of Ammon. Simon and Solomon reigned at exactly the same time and fought the same enemies in Canaan, called the Mitanni, the Hittites, and the Philistines. Pharaoh Simon's documented battle with the Philistines in Palestine and his capture of the Canaan city of Gezer clearly proves an ancient alliance between the Egyptians and the Hebrews. The famous King Solomon's temple in Jerusalem means Temple of the Sun God Ammon. According to the Talmud, King Solomon used the dark power of his magic ring to conjure up demons to help him build his temple. The temple became the center for sexual orgies, the worship of golden idols, and for animal and human sacrifices, including the sacrifice of infants and children. The biblical Ark of the Covenant was stored inside King Solomon's temple. The Ark had 4 gold rings built into its 4 corners, each representing the 4 corners of the earth over which descendants of the biblical Abraham are destined to rule. Since archaeologists claim the biblical King Solomon was no more real than the evil wizard Saruman from the movie Lord of the Rings, who built King Solomon's temple? The temple was most likely built by Pharaoh Simon, who King Solomon's fabled character was based on. Today, all that remains of the temple is the Wailing Wall, where Israel's Jews still gather to worship in Jerusalem. Did the Hebrew authors of the Bible's Old Testament really expect readers to believe that Abraham lived to be 175? That his sister wife Sarah gave birth at age 90? That Moses turned staffs into snakes and rivers into blood? Why did the Hebrew authors of the Bible omit all of the important historical names of Egyptian pharaohs? Why did they mix up historical fact with myths and legends? The big question is, what did they have to hide? Researchers of both Bible and Egyptian history have concluded that the Hebrew authors of the Bible covered up the fact that the Hebrews and the Egyptians shared the same royal bloodline. But why? Why the cover-up? Because after the Egyptian people forced the Hebrew Hyksos kings out of Egypt, the only way the Hebrews could continue ruling Egypt was to hide their Hebrew identity from the Egyptian people. They did that by changing their Hebrew names to Egyptian names and intermarrying with Egyptian royalty, just like the biblical Joseph did. By hiding their Hebrew identity, the Hebrews continued to rule Egypt secretly as Egyptian royalty. They worshipped Egyptian gods, followed Egyptian laws, and violated Jewish Hebrew laws. This meant they had to hide their Hebrew identity not just from the Egyptian people, but from the Hebrew people as well. They had to keep their royal Hebrew-Egyptian identity and their worship of Amun hidden within royal power circles and secret societies, just as they have done to this day. The world's biggest and best-kept secret is that the descendants of the Hebrew pharaohs of Egypt have ruled throughout history. Over the millennia, they have left oceans of blood in their wake. They have murdered, cheated, slaughtered, robbed, colonized, and enslaved to fulfill their biblical covenants for an eternal throne and one world empire.